The events here took place when I was an 11-year-old girl on vacation with my family. My mother, younger brother, and I went down to Port Elizabeth to visit family. Being the only kids present meant that we were more excited to play in the ocean than spend time indoors. My mom picked a sunny day, we packed our boogie boards, and we headed to the nearest beach with my grandma tagging along. My brother and I ran towards a set of stairs leading down to the beach. I stopped. There were eyes on me. I sensed it. Growing up in South Africa, you are taught to be vigilant, notice your surroundings, notice people especially. I looked around the crowd trying to pinpoint what was setting my radar off. Then I found it. Two men about 20 meters in front of me, about late 20s to early 30s. They were frozen in place, staring at me with big, toothy smiles on their faces. I returned a smile and a nod, acknowledging their presence, but also making them aware that I saw them. Be friendly, not naive. Be polite, don't trust. Observing them, I felt unsettled. The crowd was moving around them. They didn't speak to one another, and they only seemed to move as I glanced away. I was alarmed, but only made a mental note to keep an eye on them, continued down the stairs, and jumped into the soft sand. My brother and I waited for the adults to pick a spot to set up before we took off swimming. Some time went by. I saw the same men from earlier wade into the water quite some distance from us, and I felt a bit silly for still worrying about them, but I just couldn't shake that uneasiness. I got out and took a rest by my mom. I didn't see the men anywhere, but the feeling of having eyes on me stayed. I chalked it up to paranoia and went back to the water after a few minutes. My brother had gotten out of the water and started digging his magnificent sand pit, so I decided to use him as a landmark to determine my position in the water while riding the waves out. I did this a few times. Suddenly, goosebumps shot up my back. I looked around, and the same men were just a few meters away from me, waving and beckoning me towards them. I was having fun up until then, and hadn't noticed them approaching. Adrenaline set in as I saw them smiling once more. Their eyes seemed blank, insincere, and out of place with those huge grins. I nervously grinned back and just shook my head at their invitation to come closer. I'm sure the fear was written all over my face, though. As if to confirm my fears of their intentions, they started towards me. I knew I wouldn't be strong enough in the water to fight, run, or swim, and nobody was close enough to hear me call out. As I was panicking, the water suddenly pulled me deeper into the sea. A big wave was coming. I placed my boogie board in a position and started paddling. I was now further into the ocean than the creeps. The wave hit when they were about 1 meter away. It took me right past them. I felt relief for a split second, and then felt a hand grabbing and yanking my ankle hard. My heart caught in my throat. I kicked out of instinct. Fortunately, being sunscreen doused, I was slippery and managed to get free instantly. The wave carried me all the way to the beach. I was coughing with a mouthful of seawater, but scampered to my feet and ran to fetch my brother. I told him I'd race him back to Mom, and he was delighted for the challenge. I glanced back from where the sea had just ejected me. The creeps were still standing where they were, still smiling and waving. I stayed at my mom's side until we finally packed up to head home. As we walked to our car, I looked over my shoulder. There they were, 2 grown men, staring, smiling, and waving at a child they had tried to grab like nothing was weird. Then they turned around and disappeared into the crowd. Yeah, let's not meet again, you smiley fucks. This happened about 8 years ago in my local supermarket. I, a female 36 at the time, am in the queue to pay. It's a Saturday morning, super busy, and I'm second in line. In front of me, at the till, is a family of 3. Mom, Dad, and daughter. Mom and Dad are unpacking the trolley, and daughter is sitting in the trolley seat facing me. Behind me are 2 men, and they are making me super uncomfortable standing way too close to me. You know when you feel someone before you see them? It was like that. I was facing the daughter, and she looked super uncomfortable, making herself smaller, and kept looking over her shoulder to Dad. I turned around, and these men are waving and smiling, trying to get her attention. Then the one guy reaches around me and touches her foot. He did it in such a familiar way that I thought he must know the family. She flinched away. He does it again. She quietly says,
"Daddy?"
Dad swings around and says in a booming voice, something along the lines of,
"What the hell, dude? Don't touch my daughter."
This weirdo is like,
"But we want to be friends."
Dad is like,
"I don't know you. Back off."
I realize they don't all know each other and instantly go into mommy mode. Dad goes back to unpacking the trolley, and I position myself between the 2 guys and daughter, completely blocking access. Believe it or not, he tries to get her attention again. So I say, really loudly, "You are so lucky that you have such a brave and strong daddy. Look how he's protecting you from these bad men." The dad looks at me, and we have a silent conversation with our eyes. They pack up and leave quickly. I thought it was over. The girl is safe. As I'm unpacking my trolley, I suddenly notice that one of the men has moved around and is standing at the end of the till, where you pack your groceries into bags, staring at me with pure malice. The other guy was still standing behind me in the queue, my trolley between us. I won't lie, in the moment, I felt intimidated, terrified. I'm not a small woman. I am tallish with very broad shoulders and quite strong. Side note, someone told me the other day that I am definitely not fart dust, translated from Afrikaans, but super funny, i.e., I'm not small. Anyway, my trolley is 15 kilograms of dog food. My adrenaline is pumping. I need to show this guy that I am not an easy target. I make eye contact with the aggressor at the end of the till, and I lift this bag of dog food up like it's a roll of toilet paper. My facial expression doesn't change, no strain, no tension, just deep and dark. He keeps his eye contact with me. Now I am angry. The fear has gone. I pay, and he blocks my exit from the till. I bump him light with my trolley. He laughs menacingly and moves out of the way. I decided to not go straight to my car. I walk around the mall a bit, and every time I turn around, they are there, now with the 3rd guy. They are not even hiding the fact that they are following me. The one guy makes a motion of cutting my neck. Fuck this. I started making my way to the security desk. When I get there and turn around, they are gone. I tell security everything. They recommend I let the supermarket know as well. Give them my till number so they can review the security tape above the till. A guard escorted me to my car. I drove home the long way, checking my rearview mirror constantly. I never saw them again, but to be honest, I stopped going to that supermarket. Partly because of that, but mainly their prices are not competitive, and my dogs become fussy eaters. I grew up in a small beach town on the East Coast. It had that cliché suburbia vibe, complete with book clubs and block parties. My sister and I were close friends with our neighbors as well, as they had a daughter, Kristen, around our age. A lot of time was spent playing together in our shared yards, at the beach down the street, and in our nearby park. It had been one summer day that my mom and Kristen's mom decided to take us to this particular park. And as per usual, as soon as we arrived, Kristen, my sister, and I raced to the swing set to claim our seats. Our moms had followed leisurely behind us, looking ahead to see if they could snag a spot in the shade. Once they picked a picnic table, they sat down and set up. They chatted and got some snacks ready for us, occasionally glancing over to make sure we hadn't fallen off the swings. The afternoon was going well. Everyone was having fun and enjoying the weather, when Kristen's mom pointed across to where we were playing. There, instead of just 3 kids swinging, there were 4.
Seems like the girls just made a friend.
She smiled at my mom as they looked at the other little girl who had just joined us. An older woman, possibly her mother, was standing off to the side as well. My mom nodded, thinking nothing of it. It was completely normal for kids to make friends at the park, and especially in an area so friendly. Besides, she found it likely that the older woman was with her and would be able to help if anything happened. They proceeded to talk for a little bit longer before my mom thought to look over again to check on us. When she glanced over to the swings, she saw Kristen, she saw my sister, but she no longer saw me. She stared for one more second as it sunk in, and then she realized the older woman was also not there. Panic washed over her, and she immediately alerted Kristen's mom. They rushed over, hoping I was just hiding behind the slide. My mom's eyes scanned over the playground, frantically trying to find me. She recalls Kristen's mom taking the other 2 girls by the hand, attempting to ask them what happened, but before either of them were able to offer any information, her eyes locked on me. The older woman had taken me by the hand and was leading me off of the playground, out of the gate, and into the parking lot. My mom began to run after her, not explaining a word, just yelling for her to stop. The woman did not pause, did not even turn around to acknowledge my mom's screams, until she was close enough to reach out and grab my one free hand. My mom immediately began to curse and question what the hell she was doing with me. The older woman began to explain how this was a misunderstanding, that she was only just walking me to the baseball field that was right across the street. Of course, this answer was completely unacceptable, and my mom was making this clear, as Kristen's mom was quickly behind catching up, coming to aid in whatever way she could. It appeared that when the older woman noticed Kristen's mom was there as backup, she let go of my hand and began to offer some semblance of an apology before hurrying to her car and quickly pulling away. It was not until after she had already gotten down the street that my mom understood 2 suspicious details, which are: 1. The direction the older woman was walking me towards her parked car, and not at all the baseball field. And 2, the other woman did not put a child in the car before she left, meaning she came to a playground of kids by herself. I often ask my mom why she didn't call the police at this moment, and honestly, she doesn't have a good answer. She tells me that it was just shock, and I'm sure part of it was, but I also think it could have been partially due to embarrassment. However, I hope it's not at all. There was no way that she could have expected this to happen, and she may have very well saved my life at that moment, and I try to make it as clear to her as I can. While I'm into my 20s now, and this happened when I was a toddler, I still think about it from time to time. At least this recounted version my mom tells. And it's fucking scary idea to think that she wouldn't have seen me in time, and that I could have had a completely different path in life. I hope this woman never actually got the chance to take any of the kids who didn't know her into her car. And if she's still out there, let's not meet. When I was 13, I played a lot of World of Warcraft. If you know anything about WoW, you know that when you're at a lower level, you will sometimes have higher level friends help you out. This guy was an online friend of my IRL friend and asked if I needed any help in the game, and I said sure. We got talking, and he told me that he was 13 as well, so we chatted a lot and became good friends. He lived in Texas and I lived in Canada, so it was just an online friendship. He eventually started to seem interested in me and began sending me poems and things. Eventually, he told me that he wasn't actually 13. He was college age. Me being only 13, I thought, oh, that's okay. We've already talked already for months, so I thought nothing of it, which was very naive of me. But being so young, it is understandable. He started getting really flirty, and I was flattered being a 13-year-old girl having a college-aged man interested in me. I thought it was cool. So wrong, I know. He asked for my phone number, and being young and stupid, I gave it to him. I also gave him my address so he could send me things in the mail. Then he said he wasn't actually college-aged. He was 40 and had 3 kids and a wife. One is very close in age to my age at the time. I stopped talking to him and tell him to leave me alone. He starts calling my phone number and leaving drunk voicemails saying that he was going to come see me. I didn't know what to do, and I didn't want to get in trouble, so I said nothing. He wouldn't leave me alone, so I had to tell my parents, who told him to leave me alone, and he did, for a short time. Recently, he has found me by name, since I told him everything about me when I was 13, like an idiot, and keeps contacting me on all of my social media and also the email account that I've had since I was 13. He is still married and won't leave me alone. Not super creepy, but kinda creepy, as he knows my parents' address, and it is still the same as when I told him. He has messaged me saying that he is going to be in the area soon via LinkedIn. I didn't respond, and I pretend that I don't use my social media accounts. I wanted to get this off my chest for so long. It has been years. The story takes place around the time I was like 11 or 12. I could be mistaken because I realized what actually happened like 4 years ago. I never brought this story up again with my parents because I remember clearly that when they found out what happened, my mom got scared so bad that she nearly had a heart attack, and since she actually had one years ago, I don't want to stress her. When I was little, I was often home alone. I always had a babysitter, but as I got older, we didn't ask her to come anymore. This was around the time that I started going to middle school, so my schedule was coming home from school, the bus got me off directly in front of my house, eat the lunch my mom pre-made for me, and then wait, usually a couple of hours before she came home from work. At the time, we only had a family computer in the house. We each had our own account, but I didn't have a password so that they could check in on me from time to time. Around that time, I got into anime, so I just used it to watch them and save fan art. Then I discovered Windows Movie Maker and got to creating the sickest AMVs a young teenager could imagine. So, that's how I filled up those couple of hours, at least until I heard my mom coming back. Then I would rush into my room and pretend that I was doing homework all along, because I didn't want her to think I was a pushover. Then, all of a sudden, I started messaging with him. For the life of me, I can't remember how exactly he got into contact with me, but I feel like it was linked to my YouTube activity. Maybe he left a comment or something like that. I really can't remember. Anyways, the only info I got of him was that he was a man older than me, that he liked me and my work, and that he was lonely and needed a friend. We messaged on Skype, and every time we called, I had the cam on, but his wasn't. He said that it was broken, even his mic was. I never saw him or heard his voice, but he saw it and listened to me nearly every day. This is what terrifies me the most to this day. I don't remember very well what we talked about, but we did it every day. I would talk and he would respond via written message. I don't remember his name, but it was an actual name, not a nickname. It probably wasn't his real name, but this is just me assuming. I never once thought that it was inappropriate, and I wasn't uncomfortable when I talked with him, but I thought that it was strange that he wouldn't repair his PC even after all of those months. But at the end of the day, while strange, I thought I found a new friend that showered me in attention and compliments. For young me, freshly coming off being bullied for the entirety of elementary school, was like finding gold in a river. One particular exchange I remember vividly. I was eating a giant meringue my dad got for me, I love them, while I talked to him. He didn't write for a long time, so I asked if something was wrong, if he was still there. He replied after a while and said that I had very pretty pink lips. That threw me off, but at the moment, I didn't think much of it. I was saved by my mom. Even though she always worked herself to the bone, and it was not always the most admissible, she loved me with all of her heart and always had attention to details for everything, especially her only daughter. She one day noticed an envelope addressed to a man she didn't know. I was trying to send him a letter written by hand because he said that his birthday was coming up and he wanted a present from me. He also began talking about the possibility of meeting in person. Questions ensued, and I happily told her of my faceless friend. She freaked out and immediately forbid me from talking to him and got my dad involved. They both made me promise to never contact that man again and took precautions so that neither him could contact me. I remember being bummed out for not being able to talk to him, but I also remember letting it go pretty quickly. Maybe because I was young, or because I shortly after met my best friend who also lived near me, so I finally had company. I don't know why I remembered what happened only many years later, but it was like a lightning struck me when I realized what exactly I risked during that period of my life. Every time I think about it, I get such a sense of dread that it's hard to shake off. Since I got my memories back, I never talked about this with anyone. My mom was literally my God-sent angel and was responsible for me never talking with that man again. So, dear creepy, faceless, and voiceless friend, let's continue to not meet. I hope you didn't harm anyone else. This happened around the early 2000s. I was around 8 years old at the time and was at my aunt's house. My cousin, her son, was a college student at the time, but he and my aunt would regularly babysit me while my parents were at work. He recently got a new Dell laptop to use for school. During this incident, I was hanging out in his room, but he was on his desktop doing homework while babysitting me, so he let me play on his laptop. Back then, Yahoo Messenger was what used to chat with friends and our cousins, and he was logged in on his laptop. Of course, being the kid I was, I used his account to message some of our cousins or his friends, pretending to be him. Out of nowhere, I got a chat from someone I didn't recognize. Thinking it was a relative or his friend that didn't have their email or contact saved. The conversation seemed normal, until they asked for my age. Being a kid and inexperienced with the internet, I didn't think much of it at the time. So, pretending to be my cousin, I said I was a teenager. The person replied saying that they were a child. I can't remember the specific age, but they said that they were younger than my actual age. I knew that they were lying because why would a child be active on Yahoo Chat and articulate themselves so well? So I said,
"You're lying. You can't be that young and type that well."
The person then said that they were telling the truth and that I was lying about my age. I remember asking them to prove to me how they knew I was lying. They said that they can tell me what I was wearing at the time of the chat. At the time, I was wearing a pink and purple pajama set with a white cat on the shirt. The person said I was sitting on a bed with a pink shirt with a cat on it. I literally got the chills and felt the color leave my body. I looked around my cousin's room and saw that he had a Logitech QuickCam chat webcam connected to his laptop. I said to him,
"Are you messing with me right now?
No. What are you talking about?
Are you chatting with me on Yahoo Messenger?"
No. Do you see me on Yahoo right now?
He was right. He was on the internet browser the whole time. I even asked him to maximize his Yahoo chat window, and he had no conversation history with me. How could he when I was using his account? The person messaged me again saying,
Why'd you stop replying? I know you're there.
I was petrified. I closed his laptop and left it on the bed. I can't remember if this laptop even had a webcam, but almost 17 years later, I still get chills thinking about this incident. I'm positive it wasn't my cousin, and whoever it was most likely hacked into his Logitech webcam or laptop. Edit. To add to this story, my cousin never admitted it was him messing around with me either, even after my initial confrontation. He also didn't have any active chats open at the time with other people I didn't see, as this happened within maybe 10 minutes. It was a pretty short conversation. The chat with me showed up on his desktop as it was on his laptop, me using his account to chat. Again, I was 8 and my cousin was around 19 or 20, so I don't think he would have trolled me that hard and never admit to it. I hope that clarifies any confusion. This story took place in my household when my daughter was about 4 or 5 years of age, and it is a true story. I used to put my daughter to bed by reading her a story and sitting in her room until she went to sleep. This allowed me to spend much needed quality time with her after very long days on the job. We started to notice that when we woke her up in the mornings to go to daycare, she always complained of being tired. After a few weeks of her complaining to be tired and not wanting to get up for school, we started to question her. I knew for a fact that she was going to sleep because many of the nights I had fallen asleep on her floor, and upon awakening to take myself to bed, I would notice that she was sound asleep. After some prompting and questioning her, this is the story that she told us. It seems that very late in the evening, after we were all in bed asleep, she would be awakened by an old lady with a very colorful long dress that would tickle her feet and wake her up at night. My daughter exclaimed that the lady never spoke, just smiled, gave her a couple of tickles on her feet, and just sat and watched over her until she fell back asleep. This occurrence happened for over a month, and although I made it a point to spend the night in her room a couple of times just to confirm or debunk her claims, this apparition still came in the quiet of night after I was asleep and continued the ritual, despite the fact that my large butt was lying on the floor. I never heard my daughter stir, and I never caught a glimpse of the old lady. At one point, my daughter happened to see a photo of a person wearing a colorful kimono. At which point, she exclaimed that the lady that had been visiting her wore a colorful dress just like that. Not the same one in the picture, but similar. Now, my daughter is half Japanese, and at that point in her life, she had never worn or seen anyone in a kimono. But she was dead set that this was the similar dress to what the old lady wore upon entering her room and interacting with her. After many discussions with my wife, we chalked it up to my wife's grandmother, who may have been doing the visitations. My wife had been close to her grandmother and was the first one at a very young age to find her grandmother deceased in the bathtub. Needless to say, it was a traumatic experience for my wife, who again was so very close to her grandmother. Prompting more of a description of the kindly old lady from my daughter as to what the lady looked like, it was confirmed that this was my wife's grandmother visiting the grandchild she never got to see. We were overjoyed by this, and yet broken up and wished that we had our chance or ability to see her and express our love and thanks for looking over our daughter. However, as the month passed with my daughter being awakened every night and tired in the morning, with a heavy heart I went into my daughter's room while everyone was out of the house, and with the utmost respect and reverence, I asked grandmother not to wake the baby anymore. She needed her rest for school, and that we loved her and were very happy that she wanted to visit and see her grandchild, but she could no longer wake her up or let her see her. Truly, it was one of the hardest and heartfelt things that I've done, but I knew it was right. The next evening, my daughter had a sound sleep. When asked, she told us the old lady had come to say goodbye and never showed herself again. As I write this, I am so grateful that from beyond the grave, grandmother wanted to see and meet her granddaughter. And although we had never had another encounter with the grandmother in the kimono, I know that she is still out there watching over our family. So, I've had a few paranormal experiences in my life thus far. Some frightening stuff, but nothing that was actually dangerous in retrospect. Last night, around 10 p.m., my boyfriend and I were sitting in the living room trying to find a movie to watch on Amazon Prime Video. We have video surveillance cameras everywhere outside. Two that point to the front door at different angles, one for the backyard and one for the side of the house. The monitor screen is kept in the living room on a table next to the recliner that I was sitting in. I just sat down for not even 5 minutes, and then I heard a child's voice come over the monitor. The voice said,
Hello?
I thought to myself for a minute, fuck, does my son have his bedroom window open and is yelling through the window for some reason, and the camera's picking it up because there's a camera next to his bedroom window? Then I remembered, no, it can't be, because he was sleeping in my bed. I called up to him, and he answered. I look at the monitor screen, and I see a man who appeared to be very tall. He was wearing a red and white flannel shirt. He was holding a little girl's hand. She looked like she had striped long sleeves with frizzy blonde hair. They were walking up the steps to get to our entryway, and I turned to my boyfriend and said, "Somebody is here." We live in the middle of absolute nowhere. We live by a swamp. My closest neighbors are bears and coyotes and a couple of Amish houses about a mile or so down the road. So there are never ever any people, at least that we know of, who go walking down our street pitch black with no street lights on a back road at 10 p.m. at night, so it seemed very strange to us. Just as the man and the girl get to our front door, my boyfriend opens the door and they were gone. Not a single trace or sign of them. My boyfriend goes outside by the road to see if he could see any cars, but there was nothing. We thought maybe that they were having car trouble and stopped for some help, but there were no signs of that being a possibility. I let the dog outside, and my boyfriend went outside with a flashlight, but nothing was there. We watched the camera footage, and the people coming to the door never recorded. We reviewed old camera footage and saw nothing that looked or sounded like that. We don't even know people that looked like that, or anyone that could have possibly come over that looked like that. My boyfriend does not believe in ghosts, but seeing that we had no explanation for it, I think he changed his mind. We have lived in this house for 4 years, and I personally have never experienced anything until last night. My boyfriend admitted that one night when I was at work, he saw something moving in the yard and thought that it was an animal, but went out to look and nothing was there, but my son's tire swing was swinging back and forth like crazy. My son has been complaining for the past few months that he doesn't like to sleep in his bed because it sounds like something is crawling around under his bed and his bed shakes. The original part of the house was built in the 1800s and was used as an old schoolhouse. In addition, it was put onto the house 20 years ago to make it bigger. The old schoolmaster used to live across the street in a house that is no longer there. I talked to my boyfriend today, and we both said that what happened is really weird, and we've come to terms with it probably being a ghost sighting. I know I'm not crazy because he saw them and heard the voice too. I've seen many ghosts in my lifetime. I just wondered why it took so long for me to see one here. What bothers me is that it seemed like they wanted to get my attention, and it makes me feel very uneasy. A few days leading up to this, I would sit in the living room and just feel overwhelming dread and terrible anxiety. After seeing them, I don't feel any of that anymore. So weird. Update. My son hasn't been sleeping in his room because I'm not forcing him to. When he tells me these things, I let him know that I believe him 100%. We are turning what used to be his playroom into a new bedroom. I wanted to see what he was experiencing in his current bedroom, so I went there myself and took my naps before work in his room. I work the night shift, and every single night I would have a nightmare. So I said that he can sleep in my room until his new room is ready, which will be ready, hopefully, in a couple of days. I was working as a speech therapist doing some home health in Florida. One of my patients was Harold. He had suffered from a stroke, and my job was to help him regain his speech. Sweet man in his 70s. His wife was Gertrude, an equally sweeter older woman, German accent. She treated me like a guest each time I visited her home, even made me cookies and tea. Carrying on conversation with her was tough because she was hearing impaired. One day, I stopped by for my regular visit, knocked on their apartment door, but got no answer. I knocked louder and heard Gertrude say,
Harold, somebody is at the door.
When the door didn't open, I knocked louder and said, It's Ashley. I'm here for Harold's speech therapy. Again, I heard Gertrude tell Harold to get the door, but nobody answered. I decided to go back to my car and call their apartment from my bag phone. If you're old, you'll remember a huge purse-like phone that came before cell phones. Since there was no answer, I left a message saying that I was in the parking lot. Nobody was opening the door, and I'd wait for a few minutes, but then leave to try to reschedule the visit for later in the week. The door never opened, so I left. Later that day, I stopped by my office to drop off my therapy notes. My secretary said I had a phone message from Harold's son. He was apologizing for the missed appointment, but that Gertrude had passed away the previous night, and Harold was with family making arrangements. The message hit me like a ton of bricks. I had heard Gertrude's voice just that morning. I tried very hard to rationalize the situation. Maybe I was hearing a TV. But no, it was Gertrude. She used Harold's name in her German accent. Maybe I was imagining things, but no, this was in the middle of a bright, sunshiny Florida day, not some midnight stroll through a graveyard. My imagination hadn't even been thinking of the paranormal. I heard a ghost. She heard me. I will never ever forget this experience. Nothing like it has happened before or since. When I just finished college, I was living in a one-bedroom townhouse split. I met a guy on Plenty of Fish, and at that time, I wasn't exactly smart about my online digital footprint. Not like I've really changed, but at least now I'm not as ridiculous. Anyways, he seemed like a decent guy. He was really good looking, said that he had a good job, nice teeth, don't judge me, and looked like he cared about his personal health. All things that I would typically look for in a guy. I'm not a shallow human, but I like to be presentable, and if I'm with someone, I would like them to care about being presentable in a business environment also. After about a week of chatting online, we agreed to meet. We met at a restaurant downtown, which was really far from where I lived. When we got there, I noticed him standing at the door. We sat down to eat, and the evening went great. At the end of the date, we said goodbye, and I got into my car and began to drive away. I realized right away that he was following me. Because of the distance to my house, I wasn't immediately scared because it's a big city. Maybe he'll turn off the freeway. He didn't. My exit was coming up, and I decided not to take it. I kept driving. I circled the entire city on the freeway, and he stayed right behind me. I was starting to panic a bit, so I decided to go to my friend's house instead of mine, and when I pulled out the exit, I noticed that he didn't. So I had a little bit of a moment to breathe, and decided, okay, screw it, I'll just go home. I took the off-ramp back to the freeway and began going back to my exit. I got home and showered and was getting ready for bed, and I started feeling dumb because, was that really him? Am I overreacting? Do I ask him if he was following me? Just a number of things were racing through my overactive imagination, or so I thought. I decided that I was going to message him and just said, "Had a good time, good night." And when I started typing, all of a sudden a message came through my phone of a picture of my car outside my house. I nearly died. My heart jumped out of my chest and I started shaking. I didn't know what to say, and he texts me and says,
I didn't know you lived across the street from me.
I've met my neighbors, and not once have I ever met him. There was a huge apartment complex kitty corner to my townhouse, so maybe that's where he lived, I don't know. I popped up and went to look outside, and there he was, just standing there, outside, like he was waiting for me. I opened the door, and he asked if he could come in and if I wanted to still hang out. I told him that I was exhausted, and I'd rather just crash out, as it had been a long day. The next morning, I woke up to go to work, and my windshield had been smashed. My car was keyed, my back two tires were slashed. And, as I was noticing the damage to my vehicle, the guy comes out of his car with 2 coffees, and is like,
Oh, I thought I'd surprise you with a morning coffee.
So again, I'm freaked out. I called the cops and reported the damage to my vehicle. This guy offered to drive me, and something in my gut was like, don't get in that car. So I called my boss and told them the situation and explained that I wasn't going to be there until after the police came. This guy just hung out the whole time, by the way. When the police finally got there, the guy was acting really suspicious. He walked away and was like hiding on the other side of his car. I filed a report. The police basically said, "Hope you have insurance," and were on their way to leave. They pulled around the corner, and all I heard was the siren on the cop's lights turn on, and the cop screamed, "Freeze! Put your hands in the air and get down on your knees." I looked, and the cop has his gun drawn at this guy, and the dude's on the ground getting arrested. I spoke with the cop after he got into the back and explained that he was wanted for stalking, breach of probation, assault with a deadly weapon, fraud, and aggravated sexual assault. I was shook. It took me a couple of days to get over the hypothetical situations that could have happened. About a week later, I was on my way out the door to work, and guess who was sitting in my driveway? We live in Canada, so essentially you're released on conditions until you go to jail. I told him I was late for work, but that I'd call him when I was done. I never went to work that day. I went and found a new apartment in another area of the city. I also changed my phone number and hired my friend's husband and his friends to go pack my apartment up and move it to their place for a month, and then move to my new place because I was so scared that this dude would follow me while moving. So, that's my horror story of the first time I used Plenty of Fish. Let's call her Sam. All throughout high school, and even for a bit afterwards, we were best friends. Even though we were best friends, I felt that I didn't really know her, if that makes sense. We were pretty wild teenagers, drinking, smoking, and hanging out with older guys. Ew, I know, etc. Sam always dated super sketchy guys. When we were 16, Sam started dating a 27-year-old named John. Disgusting, I know. I had my fair share of dating guys way too old for me as well, though, so I didn't see anything wrong with it. Also, predators have a special way of making you feel like there's nothing wrong with what they're doing. I have had my fair share of trauma due to older men from that time in my life, but that's a story for another time. She didn't have a car at the time, so she would regularly ask me to drop her off at his place, to hang out and cover for her if her mom contacted me, because this relationship was obviously hidden from her mom. Being an idiot teenager, I was like, yeah, sure, whatever, she's my homegirl, and I know that she'd do the same for me. Plus, I'd met John several times before, and he seemed decent enough at the time. Please keep in mind that I was also a teenager at the time, and obviously I realize that he's a predator now. He would give us alcohol and stuff, and would invite us over to party with his equally disgusting friends. Their relationship seemed fine at first, but it turned toxic within a few months. I mean, duh, he's a grown man manipulating a little girl. He would constantly demand to track her phone location and control what she wore. He also cheated on her multiple times, but she always stayed. During the time this happened, I stopped driving her to see him. One time, she called me begging to drive her to see him. I said no. She went on to explain that he was drunk, and if I wouldn't, then he would pick her up, and if they got into a crash due to drunk driving, it would be my fault. So I drove her to his house. I was furious with John at this point for hurting my best friend and had a rebellious teenage give no fucks attitude. So as soon as I walked into his house to drop Sam off, I started screaming at him for being a manipulative piece of shit. His response and the dark, twisted, yet emotionless look in his eyes still give me chills to this day.
I could break your neck so easily.
Thankfully, I was standing right by the door, so I ran out to my car and immediately sped off. The next couple of years are kind of fuzzy. Also, I asked Sam to stop talking to me about John, because I was sick of hearing about him. But basically, they were constantly breaking up and getting back together. Sam dated a string of other guys, but would always cheat on them with John. When we were 18, this is when things started getting progressively weirder, and I started to distance myself from Sam because of it. Long story short, Sam had a new boyfriend who she seemed crazy about, and I was so relieved because she finally seemed over John. Then, she heard through the grapevine that John got engaged, and she became irate. We were hanging out when she heard the news, and she was like,
I just have to go home and process this.
So she immediately left, and I was like, whatever, I'll give her some space. She calls me a few hours later and was talking super fast and laughing a lot. I was like, you good? And she was like,
Yeah, I just broke into John's apartment and smashed all of his shit. I know that I have this new guy I'm dating, but I've been hooking up with John still. Don't hate me, and I'm sorry I didn't tell you, but anyway, I feel so great. I broke his TV and cut up all his sheets. Too bad John and his fiancée weren't home.
I'd never seen her act like this before and was so alarmed. What would she have done if they were home? The break-in was never reported to the police because she told John it was her. And if he went to the police, John's fiancée likely would have found out that he was cheating on her with Sam. Now, at this point, a smart person would completely cut her off. But I didn't. I stopped hanging out with her as much as I could, and we naturally grew a bit distant because I had moved across the country for college. But we would text and FaceTime every couple of weeks. So, at this point, you're probably thinking, okay, so what about the murder? Hang tight, we're almost there. In 2018, John's fiancée was found dead. The police immediately ruled it as a suicide because there was a note and a gun was found in her hand. But all of her friends and family insisted that she would never do that. I know this because I had a few mutual friends with his fiancée, and it was understandably all that anyone could talk about. She was known to everyone as being extremely positive and cheerful. They pressured the cops to investigate more, and lo and behold, 1 year later, John was found guilty of murdering her. Thanks for that, cops. He's currently in prison, and it chills me to the bone knowing that I was in his house on multiple occasions and used to frequently hang out with him. So now moving on to why I think my friend may have had something to do with it. Last year, she was visiting my city and asked to meet up for dinner. I was like, sure, why not? We're gonna be in public, and I do miss her, and it'd be nice to catch up. While we were at dinner, she had her phone on the table, and I saw a call from the name Jail ringing on her phone. She quickly excused herself to take the call and was gone for a couple of minutes. When she got back, I was like, WTF? She explained that she visits John in prison regularly, and they talk on the phone every day. I was like, why? He was found guilty of murder. Why would you want anything to do with him? And she looked at me dead in the eyes, with a look of pure evil and malice, and said,
I'm the only one who knows what actually happened. No one else knows the truth.
I quickly changed the subject and finished my dinner really quickly, and made an excuse to leave. I was terrified at this point, and had no idea what she was capable of. I hightailed it back to my apartment and blocked her on everything. I haven't spoken to her since. I know that this isn't solid proof that she was involved, but her past behavior, the break-in, coupled with that chilling comment and the fact that she regularly visited a convicted murderer in prison, leads me to believe that she had something to do with it. At the very least, she knows much more than she's admitting. Sam, let's never fucking meet again. In 2018, I ended up in a small town that didn't have very much in it and was pretty separated from everything with a friend that I hadn't seen in about 11 years. I was staying at this friend's parents' house with friend while I was there, which was fine, of course, well, until it wasn't. I woke up in the morning and friend had gone to work, leaving me with parent for the day. I sat with them and talked for a while before they offered me some water. I accepted, and they poured it from a jug because
City water is so bad for you, so I get well water from my sister.
all was good, but I found the water a bit odd. But I'm from the big city, and I'm not really exposed to well water, so I assumed that it was the difference. I should mention that I spend my time watching people and their body language, micro-expressions, etc. in conversation, because I find it interesting, and over time I noticed a bit of a shift. Parents started saying things like,
The world is a cruel place for beautiful people like you, but we won't ever be.
and talked about how they'll always be there for me, how they'll keep me safe, how they hope I spend a lot of time there, even though I live 8 hours away. I also realized that these statements were lining up with when I was taking sips of water. I told myself I was being paranoid, and parent was insisting I drink the water while talking because they were being a parent, fretting over health and stuff. That's why they wanted me to drink the water from the well, you know? I did get a weird feeling from what I assumed was anxiety about a new place, so when parent was gone to do something, I poured it out, got a new glass, refilled it with tap water, and sat back in my spot. This water was used for everything throughout the day. Coffee? Well water. Steaming food cooked for me? Well water. The conversation kept bouncing back to those statements while I ate and such, but again, just nerves. Later in the evening, parents started talking about other things, like how the government wanted their secrets because they found a way to cure terminal illnesses, which I honestly don't have an issue with. Sometimes people think things that aren't common. And then, it abruptly switched to how their ex-partner stole their other 2 children by using chemical hypnosis to poison them against parent. Okay, this was getting strange. So I contacted my parents and asked if they'd switch my travel ticket to ASAP because my bad feeling was getting worse. I left my phone unattended while I washed my hair, and then friend came home. I felt better afterwards and sat in the kitchen with them, feeling kind of ridiculous for being nervous about well water and uncommon ideas, until parent filled friend's water bottle with tap water. That was it for me. I said I was tired and I locked myself in the bedroom until the morning when I walked into the kitchen and told them that I was leaving in 3 hours because of a family emergency. I was paranoid for days. I actually have witnesses to the fact that every time I talked about it, my phone would ring with a number from the area code. The first time was a coincidence, the next 3 weren't. I also got a text from a number I'd never seen that said,
Hey, Opathy, do you have time to chat?
I asked who it was, and they immediately said that they had the wrong number. Except my name isn't common, and the spelling is even less so. I handed my company the phone, and they told me that I needed to talk to someone about what was happening, because this wasn't normal, and crossing over into worry territory. I saw my psychologist a few days later, and her exact words were, "Did you get a blood test when you got back? You should have gotten a blood test." She told me the behavior lines up with drugging someone. I was to monitor my mental health for worsening paranoia and/or psychosis, and go to a hospital if anything out of the ordinary happened, because it was way too late for any info to come up in a test. I had tech people run diagnostics on my phone, and there were 2 programs I definitely never downloaded. Like actually downloaded into a file that doesn't show up normally. I don't know how to explain it properly. So we fully factory reset my device and I changed my number. This is even more unsettling because I run virus scans on my devices unnecessarily often, and nothing came up before they did some digging. I haven't heard from friends since, and I haven't reached out. I'm healthy and sober with my mental health under control, but this still makes me so nervous to talk about. This is actually the first time I've ever talked about it openly on the internet, and I'm definitely nervous something will happen, but I've moved twice and changed all of my accounts, gotten a new phone, and changed my codes and passwords every 3 weeks. When I was 16, I took an SAT prep class to improve my score and get into a good college. The class was pretty boring, but I met the most interesting girl in the class. She was thin, fairly short, with light brown hair and green eyes. She always wore a green headband, which I thought was cute. Her name was Connie. We hit it off immediately and spent most of the class whispering to each other side by side at our desks. I spent about 3 weeks sitting next to her, talking during the class. When the class was over, we exchanged IM handles so we could keep in touch. This was in the early 2000s. About a year passed and we continued talking online. We got to know each other pretty well, but we lived on completely different sides of the city, and it was quite a drive to visit each other. So being the young teens we were, we never actually got together. Eventually, I worked up the courage to ask her out for dinner. I set our date at a restaurant located between the both of us so we wouldn't have to drive too far. The time for our date rolled around, and I headed to the restaurant to meet her. I walked in and saw her sitting in a booth with 2 older individuals at the far side of the establishment. She looked exactly like she did in the class, thin, light brown hair, green eyes, and she was wearing her signature green headband. I approached her and said hello. I gave her a hug and sat down next to her in the booth. I assumed these 2 older individuals across from us were her parents. Odd, I thought, but maybe they were there to chaperone. I could tell immediately that something was wrong. The 2 older individuals looked very confused, surprised, almost bewildered. The look on Connie's face was also one of perplexity. Eventually, she said, "Who are you?" I was shocked. I said, I'm Jason. Remember we set up the date for tonight? I assume that these are your parents. It's very nice to meet you." And I reached out my hand to shake her parents' hands. They didn't return my handshake. Instead, they simply looked at their daughter and said,
Oh, did you forget to tell us this, Sarah?
"Sarah," I said, "you told me your name was Connie." She looked absolutely puzzled and said,
Sorry, you must have me confused with someone else.
"Oh, my mistake," I replied, then scratched my head and headed out of the restaurant to my car. I was embarrassed. Maybe she just didn't want to go out with me, I thought. She could have at least said no instead of leading me on this charade. Defeated and humiliated, I decided to just head home. When I opened the door to my car, I heard a voice behind me say,
Hey, Jason.
I turned around, and it was a tall, light blonde-haired woman with a large round face and blue eyes. Do I know you?" I said.
It's me, Connie. We had a date planned, remember? Where are you going?
She said. We went inside and had dinner. She was definitely Connie. She remembers all of our previous conversations over the past year, but she looked nothing like the girl I met in class. When I asked her why she stopped wearing her green headband, she had no recollection of ever wearing or even owning this type of headband. I can't explain it. I live in very rural southern Appalachia, and yesterday I was going over to the next county to look at a lawnmower. It's an area I'm very familiar with, although I haven't been to the area in over a year. While on the way, I came upon a town that has never been there before. Now, there is a small community there, and it was by the same name, but this was a full-fledged small town. It had a couple of red lights, a main street with probably 15 to 20 storefronts, everything. I was so taken aback, I stopped in the middle of the road. After a few moments, a car behind me honked the horn, so I pulled into a parallel spot and got out. Now, the small towns in my area are all the same. Tiny, dingy, run down. Had a heyday in the 50s and 60s, but all have fallen into disrepair. Not this one. Everything was pristine and new looking. Swept sidewalks, shiny windows, and clean brick. The people I saw were dressed in modern clothes and had the same appearance that most people in the area have. Healthy, but weather-beaten and aged beyond their years. The vehicles I saw were fairly modern, new to 20 years old, nothing out of the ordinary. I walked into the little restaurant, Cream of the Crop Cafe, and it looked like every other little restaurant in the area. Booths and tables, a bar top with a register and the kitchen behind it, some cheesy James Dean and Marilyn Monroe pictures on the walls. I walked up to the girl at the counter and asked her where I was. She seemed puzzled because I could tell she knew that I was local by my attire and my accent, but she said,
Minneapolis.
I said, "So this is Minneapolis. When did they build all of this?" Again, she looked puzzled and said,
I don't know. The 1800s sometime?
I couldn't handle it anymore, so I just left. I got in my truck and went back to look at the lawnmower. On the way back through, about an hour later, there was Minneapolis, like it should be. A couple houses and an old general store. No town, no red lights, no cafe, no sidewalks. It freaked me out something awful. I've never experienced anything such as this, as I'm pretty mundane and boring. It wasn't a hallucination, I don't think. Everything else was the same. It wasn't a dream, so I don't know. My coworker and I responded to a help desk ticket at an office inside the back house of a large casino resort in Las Vegas. If you don't know your place in the back house, you can get lost in there very quickly. Their properties are massive. There's basically secret passages and hidden doorways. We drove out together to this property to service a machine at an office, a manager's office of the PBX room. We got inside the building, got screened by security at the door, and then walked right into the back house of this luxurious resort. We've never been here before, and we both forgot to ask for directions when we got in. We looked at the ticket and just proceeded as if we knew where we were going. Both of us were talking about the Doctor Strange movie the entire time, and did not pay any attention to where we were going. It was like automatic. He was following me, and I was following him. The next thing you know, we're right where we needed to be. We ended our chat about Doctor Strange's eyes and the end credit scene. When we got done with the job, we realized we don't know how to get back out. We had to call security dispatch to escort us out of the building. As he escorted us back to the guests' parking, we start to observe the path that he took. The path includes very long hallways, different turns, taking an elevator and back down an escalator, more long hallways, more turns, until we finally made the exit. We both looked at each other and thought there was no way we could have walked all that path ourselves without getting lost. We remember talking the entire time about the movie as we're walking to that office, but not once did we remember ever taking those paths. Even if he led us in a different path, we couldn't recall how both of us ended up in that PBX office. This blows my mind because we both have never been there before. We've been on service calls together many times, and this is the first time we worked at this property. I don't know if this counts as a glitch or some other strange phenomenon, but what an odd feeling. I've never experienced anything like that. We're both on lunch now, and I'm taking my time to post here before I forget. I live in a city with a public transportation system. They have been extremely short-staffed, and more often than not, you have to call to make sure your bus is even coming. On weekdays during business hours, the public transit operator will order a lift for you to get to work if your bus isn't showing up or if they're short a driver. Tuesday, I'm at the bus stop after checking multiple times if my bus is coming, only to find out that it wasn't. They ordered me a lift, and this nice older gentleman was my driver. We had casual conversation, and he was starting to ask personal questions. I'm a bartender, and I'm super friendly already, so I didn't think his questions were ill-intentioned. I told him I'm not married, and I'm pretty much a loner. I basically go to work, and then go home and spend time with family. He then says,
I'd marry you in a heartbeat.
Again, I'm just thinking he's being funny or nice. I asked him to drop me at the downtown grocery so I could pick up some things I needed for work. When we stopped, he said that he was joking and that he's married and has a son my age. Asked if I was interested in maybe meeting him. Since I have a terrible track record, I figured it wouldn't hurt meeting someone out of my circle and comfort zone. So I gave the man my number and we parted ways. The next morning, he texts me and asked if I needed a ride to work. I told him he didn't have to do that and I was sure my bus was running. He said that it would be his pleasure and that he'd pick me up at my house at 3 p.m. Then about an hour later, he asked if I wanted to have lunch with him before work. I told him that I was busy and that I couldn't do that. He said,
Okay, see you at 3.
He shows up at 3 and lets me know he's outside. While I'm finishing getting my things together, I open the door and he started to walk up my stairs to my house. I told him I was ready and we could head downtown. When I get in the back seat, he turns around and says that he has a confession. He told me from the time I took off my mask, his heart had danced like a butterfly. He said that he hasn't been able to stop thinking about me since the day before, and that he'd love to spend time with me, and that he'd pay me for my time if I spent the day with him. That's when I started to feel super uncomfortable. The whole ride was making me cringe, but I know when you're in a situation like that with a predator, playing nice is safer than freaking out. He continued on the entire ride about how he loved me at first sight and wanted to make me his Lebanese queen. As we got closer to downtown, I started to feel relief. He dropped me off at my hotel and said,
See you tomorrow.
That evening at work, I checked my phone after a busy happy hour, and he's texted me a couple of times. He sent a picture of the hotel and said that he'd wait for me to get off to give me a ride home. I told him I already had a ride, but thank you anyways. Thursday morning, I'm out running errands with my mom and sister. He texts me and asks how early he can pick me up because he can't stop thinking about me. I ask him to please stop and that I was with family. He continues to text me all day and evening, begging to see me, telling me his heart is aching to see his Lebanese queen. I just kept saying, please stop. Friday morning, the shit hit the fan. He tells me that he loves me no matter what. He tells me that
I told my wife about you,
and that
I'm in love with you and want a divorce.
I told him to please don't do that. and that it wasn't right to treat his wife that way. He said it wasn't my fault, that they were drifting apart anyways. Then he said,
I'm picking you up for dinner at 5:30, and I'm not taking no for an answer.
I ignored the messages during the day and just went about my off day. Around 5:25, my video doorbell rings and he's standing on my porch for at least 15 minutes. I told him I wasn't home and that he should leave. He continues to text me and beg to come pick me up from my parents. I was home the whole time, but was too scared to let him know that. I eventually called the non-emergency police station, but he had already left by the time I got through. I filed a general report, but technically they can't do anything unless he's standing on my porch threatening me. They advised me to report through Lyft, so I did. I haven't heard anything since then, but the shit was just creepy as fuck. On Tuesday, February 22nd, 2022, I had a person come into my job. I work in women's clothing, and it was a customer I'd helped out on 3 occasions over the last 8 months. They said that they were a man with he/him pronouns, but his girlfriend liked it when he dressed up in women's clothing. I didn't find anything wrong with this because I enjoy helping people feel good about themselves. I asked if this was consensual, and he said yes, he enjoyed it too. On this particular day, he came in, this time with a wig and dress on, which again, I found no issue with. In fact, I felt proud of him. He asked for the fitting room once no one was in the store, and asked for my opinion on something he was wearing. I agreed. He opened the fitting room door and was standing there with a blouse on and no pants, but was wearing a pink and white polka-dotted diaper. I was shaken and uncomfortable, but maintained my composure and said the top was cute and turned away. He tried on another outfit and was fully clothed this time, and asked if we had anything shorter because his girlfriend likes it when he gets a pedicure and the lady doing his toes can see his diaper. I grew more and more uncomfortable, but being alone, I didn't say anything other than, "Oh, that's interesting." He asked if we had any long shirts that could be used as a dress, and I said yes and went to fetch them. I came back, and one by one, he came out in tops with his diaper showing, and even told me a story about him peeing himself at a sex store and his girlfriend changing his diaper in front of the employees, who were turned on by this. The discomfort grew and grew until I was shaking and texting my coworker to come in early. He comes out of the fitting room in the dress that he came in with and turned away and acted like he was on the phone, but I noticed it was his calculator instead. I stood there trying to calm down and everything when he comes back and says his girlfriend gave him the task of taking a photo with me in his bra and diaper. I declined and said that I was not okay with that, and he said that it was okay, but that he was going to get a spanking from her later. He left shortly after thanking me for my help, but not purchasing anything, which was a first. I brushed the experience off as a weird occurrence and went on about my day, thinking I wouldn't see him for a few more months again. I went home later that day, and my coworker texted me saying that he was back and doing the same thing to her, but he left again without making a purchase. The next day, I asked my coworker to come in early so I wasn't alone, and she did. He came in again, and I went to the back because I was about to have a panic attack. I felt sexually harassed simply just looking at him and picturing the look he had when he was just staring at me in the diaper. I overheard him asking my coworker my name and when I would be working again. She didn't give him either, and he left after making a purchase on a blouse he tried on the day before. My coworker told me he identifies as she, which threw me off since it contradicted what he told me the day before. At this point, I filed a report with the police. I genuinely think that this is a ploy to traffic me. An officer comes to talk to me, and I tell him everything. The next day, I was off work, and I get a call from my coworker saying he drove by looking into the store, and when my coworker caught him staring, he drove away. I went to the police station since I had to drop off my statement and inform them on what happened. The next day, I opened the store and had to go by the bank. When I was driving to the bank, I noticed his truck outside an auto parts store. I called the investigator and told him about this, and he got a tag number and noticed that he had a sticker for a local campsite that expires Monday. It's February. Who the fuck is camping in February by a lake? All in all, I feel good knowing more about him than he knows about me. I know his name, where he works, and that he's got a campsite until Monday. I didn't see him yesterday or today, but I'm hoping he got the message that he scared the fuck out of me. I'll keep you updated as this goes on. Edit. For context, I'm a 25-year-old female. I'm 5'2". The person discussed in this post is about 6'5", 350 pounds. Late 30s, mid 40s. Hopefully this will help shed some light on why I was worried to call this person out on their shit while I was alone. Thank you to everyone who's given advice thus far. I appreciate it more than y'all know. Update. He came in today while I was working, and the cops were called. He's been banned from the store, and if he comes back, he will be arrested. If anything else happens, I'll be sure to post it here. Thank you for reading and giving words of encouragement. I appreciate it more than you could ever understand. I'm proud to have stood my ground today for my store and my employees. No one should ever have to go to work and be in fear for the sake of customer service. Fuck any creep who utilizes customer service as a way to sexually harass people who just want to put food on the table. Again, I thank each of you so much. So this is a story from around 10 years ago. I was 16 to 17 at the time, but I recently discovered this sub and it instantly brought these memories flooding back to me. At the time, I kind of just brushed it off because nothing bad ended up happening to me and put it down to, I guess shit just happens to you when you're a woman walking alone at night. But looking back now, I realize how creepy it really was. I was coming home on my own on a Thursday night after being out at a pub with some friends. We had been out a little more centrally in the city, so I had to take a bus on my own to get home to my residential neighborhood. I had done this route hundreds of times, so I didn't see it as being particularly dangerous, especially as I live in a fairly nice neighborhood. It was only about 11 p.m., but because I lived in a residential area, and it was in the middle of a working week, when I got off the bus at my stop, it was absolutely dead and there was no one around. Again, this didn't spook me, particularly as it was only about a 5 to 10 minute walk from the bus stop to my house. As I turned down a long residential street that leads towards my house, I noticed a guy walking further down the street. This put me a little on edge, but I was reassured by the fact that he had his back to me and was walking away from me down the street. As I kept walking down the street, I noticed the guy turned around and clocked me. That's fine, I thought. I always turn around when I hear someone walking behind me at night, so nothing weird about that. But I noticed as we got further and further down the street, he kept doing it. He kept checking if I was still walking in the same direction as him. At this point, I'm starting to get pretty freaked out, particularly as I'm painfully aware that we are the only two people around. Just as I was weighing up what I should do, he turned down the path of one of the houses to our right, and I breathed a sigh of relief. He's going into his house. I was just being paranoid the whole time. The houses in my area are terraced with front doors being kind of embedded into an enclave at the front of the house. What this means is that from where I was standing, about 50 feet away, I couldn't actually see the front door of the house, as it was obscured by the wall. However, I saw him walk down the path and disappear into the front door enclave, so my logical conclusion was that he was letting himself into his house. I can't describe exactly what made me feel like this, but after that initial feeling of relief wore off, I suddenly got this really bad feeling, so I stopped walking and just stood there. There was this tiny voice in my head that said, "What if he's just faking you out?" The feeling became so strong that I stepped off the pavement and ducked down behind a parked car and just waited. After a couple of minutes of crouching behind the car, staring at the house, I saw movement and my heart stopped. The man came back down the path, out onto the street, and was looking around, looking for me. He must have been waiting for me in the doorway, knowing that if I kept walking, I wouldn't see him until it was too late. Unfortunately for him, his hiding place also meant that he couldn't see me. So when I didn't walk past as he anticipated, he had to come back out into the street and try to work out where I was. Looking back now, I probably should have called the police at this point, but as a scared teenager, my fight or flight brain took over, and I sprinted down one of the roads, running perpendicular to the street that we were on, as I knew I could use it to take a slightly longer route home. I didn't stop running until I got home, where I quickly double-locked the door behind me. Amazingly, I didn't even think to wake anyone in my family up. I literally just went to bed and woke up the next morning and went to school. I dread to think what would have happened if I hadn't just suddenly got a bad feeling and stopped walking. Part of me thinks that on some subconscious level, my brain must have registered not hearing the front door shut after the man had approached it, and therefore triggered an alarm in my head. But I had no perception of this at the time. Lesson learned: trust your gut. Here's my story. I'm currently almost 18, and this happened when I was a 3 or 4-year-old boy. I know that because it's one of the first memories I can recall myself having, probably because it was a pretty major event in my otherwise simple life. I was living in Moscow with my parents and my older sister. We were a pretty poor family and lived a very conservative lifestyle. My parents would go to work every day, and while my sister was at school, my grandparents would come over and cook for me and look after me, which is very normal for a Russian family. Back to the point. It was the summer of 2001 or 2002, and my family went on our bi-weekly supermarket trip. It was a big deal as I wasn't allowed to get out much due to the fact that we were living in a pretty rough district of Moscow. My dad was driving that day, and everything was normal when we got to the supermarket. While my mom and sister were getting all the food and other things, I would normally be with them. That day, I stopped to try and read a label or something, and when I looked back up, I realized that my mother wasn't there. She assumed that I was still following them, while I assumed that they were taking a while picking groceries. My dad wasn't nearby, as I'll explain later. It was one of those moments which we all experience, where we lose our parents in the supermarket and start freaking out. As a toddler, I obviously started tearing up, and I didn't really know what to do. Then, a man saw me, ran up to me, and asked what was wrong. I told him that I lost my family, and he quickly asked if my mother was the blonde lady. I told him that she was, and he stretched out his hand and told me that he knew where they went. I immediately got very happy and held his hand as we walked out of the supermarket into the car park. Despite what my parents told me about following strangers, I assumed that my mom had already bought everything and headed off back to the car. The man walked me up to his car, opened the door, and told me to climb in. Looking back at it, it was probably the stupidest thing I had ever did in my life, because I proceeded to get into the car as he shut the door. This is where my dad came into the story. When we were in the supermarket, he realized that he left the multimedia controller in the car. For those of you that this makes little sense to, this is what that means. As was common in Russia, not sure about other countries, cars at that time had the big multimedia boxes installed, and you could attach different controllers to them, which were upgradable and gave you different functions or looked better, etc. These removable controllers were quite expensive, and thus it was extremely common for cars to be broken into in order to have them stolen. Thus, most people developed a habit of removing it and taking it with them, or at least putting it in the glove box. My dad quickly went to grab it from the car, fearing that it could be thieved. While he was in the car, he saw me walking with a stranger and immediately realized what was going on. He got out and sprinted towards us, and he got there just as the strange man closed the door with me in the car. I'm not going to pretend that I know what happened next or make up a Hollywood-style fist fight between my dad and the man, but all I know is that a few seconds later, my dad carried me away from the car, and I couldn't see the man anywhere in sight. It was my dad's pounding heart that made me realize what had just happened, and I started crying hysterically and apologized to my dad and mom, who ran outside to look for me. I think that was the last straw for my parents, as a month or so after that, we sold our flat and lived with my grandparents, while my parents were finishing buying a new flat on the opposite side of the city, in a much safer district. Parents, regardless of how smart you may think your kids are, don't leave them unattended in public places. There are some horrible people around here, and not only in Moscow. And to the strange man from all those years ago, let's never, ever meet again. A few days ago, I decided to go to Walmart to pick up a few things. That day, I was wearing a bright dress with sunflowers printed on it. I wore my hair down, which is also a brighter blonde color. As I was shopping, I went down the international aisle to grab mirin. As I walked down, I felt eyes on me. I stood in front of the shelves stocked with different sauces and condiments, looking for mirin, when a guy came so close to me that I had to look at him. The moment we locked eyes, he smiled and said,
Hi, how are you?
I instantly felt uneasy, so I said nothing, smiled at him, and walked away. There's no particular reason this man made me feel uneasy. He looked fine. He looked like he was in his early mid-30s, maybe a few inches taller than me, around 5'8", and had brown hair. His dirty orange cutoff shirt and brown boots made me think that he was in construction, but who knows? All I know is that he was weird in a way that I can't put my finger on. After I walked away, I went to the complete opposite end of the store and kept looking around me. He was nowhere to be found for the next 20 minutes or so that I shopped, so I thought that I was just overreacting. I started heading towards the checkout area, and once I got to the lines, I saw him standing right next to the refrigerators next to the checkout, staring at me. He had one item in his hand, so after we made eye contact, he walked towards the self-checkout area. I did a 180 and headed for the longest line I could find, thinking that I could wait him out. It took about 20 minutes to get through checkout, and I dragged my feet out of the store, making sure the guy wasn't waiting for me in the store. With him nowhere to be seen, I picked up the pace once I got outside. I started to think that I was being irrational. He wasn't unattractive. He gave off no signs of actually being dangerous. I must be crazy, right? Walking towards my car, I saw a brown worker's truck waiting close to the exit start to drive around the parking lot once I stepped out of the store. I didn't think much of this truck at the time because I had thought the guy had left, and at that point, I just wanted to get into my car because it was raining. I finished packing my truck when the same truck started to pull through the spot diagonal to mine, slowly inching into the spot right next to my car so that my driver's side was right next to the truck's driver's side. I heard the guy's voice say,
"Excuse me."
as I opened my car door. I quickly slid in, hoping I could just get away with him thinking that I didn't hear him. I locked the door, turned the car on, and quickly turned it into reverse. I started pulling out, but before I could get far, the brown truck pulled forward and moved diagonally right behind my car so that I couldn't back up without hitting his car entirely. I looked in front of me and realized with a car in front of me, there was no way I was going to just drive right out of there with no issues. I turned my head and saw the guy sitting in his truck with his window rolled down. I decided to roll down my window and asked, "What's up?" in a hostile tone. He began,
"I just saw you in the store, and you are absolutely so beautiful. I just had to tell you."
"Oh, thank you," I said, praying he didn't get out of his vehicle.
"I couldn't let myself walk away without asking for your number so that I can take you out."
He told me. I picked up my hand with a wedding ring and told him, "I'm married," as he began to respond. I rolled up my window and stared at my steering wheel, waiting for him to move his truck. I couldn't stand to look in his direction because I felt his eyes on me. So after what seemed like the longest minute, I heard him finally move his truck. I peeled out of there in a heartbeat. The guy might have had great intentions. He might have been genuine, but I got a dark and heavy vibe that didn't sit right with me. So guy at Walmart who blocked me into my spot to ask me out, let's not meet again. My best friend and I went to Walmart one day to get groceries for her mom. We went in and started grabbing produce on the list when I noticed a strange man standing right by the front door and staring. It gave me the creeps, but overall, I thought it was just a weird man. I live in SoCal and they're everywhere. About 6'3", Hispanic, and wearing a Ducks sweatshirt. As I was grabbing some potatoes, he comes uncomfortably close to me and looks at the potatoes too. I walk away and go to my friend who is 20 feet away from me. I still don't mention this man to my friend because I thought he just had no clue of keeping a good social distance between people. We finally made our way to the soup aisle, and here he comes, walking down the aisle right in between me and my best friend to look at chicken broth. I tell my friend we need to go grab other things, so we leave the aisle and I give her the rundown on how I believe this man is following me. She agrees that she's seen him and feels weird energy around him. We head over to the tampon section because my friend needed some. I'm standing at our cart and she's squatting down on the ground when this man comes up and squats right next to her, looking at pads and tampons. This made us feel extremely awkward, so we left immediately and went to the back of the store to see if he was actually stalking us. We noticed that in his basket, he had nothing but a bottle of Sprite. Yet, he's been down so many food and item aisles with us that he should have grabbed something if he was just a normal shopper. We waited about 5 minutes in the back of Walmart, where we start to walk to the front, and we see him walking the opposite way as us, peering down each and every aisle. Once he sees us, he stops and just pretends to look at something on a side aisle while keeping eye contact on us. My friend and I went to the makeup section. If you know a ghetto Walmart, you know it's blocked with only one way in and one way out, with a lot of cameras. We go in here and look out through one of the aisles to see him still searching for us. We start to kind of freak out because we both aren't the strongest girls and know that he can probably take us if it came down to that. We decide to hurry up and get in line to check out. I was talking to my best friend, facing away from the cashier, when he gets in line right behind us. She did the most ballsy thing I've ever seen her do and told him off. She was saying how he was following us and that he went down every aisle we did, but only has a Sprite in his basket. Soon after, he scarcely walks away, which still made us feel uneasy. We didn't know if he would be waiting outside for us or have him and some friends ready to get us. We went to a worker and told them to keep their eye out for this guy. After we check out, we quickly made our way to the car with my friend's taser ready to zap. We made it back safe to the car and didn't see him since our interaction. Hopefully, I never meet this guy again. So I've been browsing this subreddit for a bit and just remembered an old story that my mom told me from when I, a 17-year-old male, was very young, around 3 years old. My mom is a therapist. She has plenty of clients with mental disorders, PTSD, suicidal thoughts, etc. She had one client who was a female police officer. She had started going to therapy because her daughter had recently passed away and was completely devastated. They had a few sessions together until the female police officer ended up taking her own life. I'm not quite sure how much time had passed after her passing when my paranormal experience happened. Maybe a couple days, possibly a week, but one day, shortly after, I was in my parents' bedroom next to my crib when I looked in their closet and saw a dark figure standing there. I couldn't make out any facial details, but I could see that it was wearing a police uniform. It wasn't frightening or threatening to me in any way. I walked out of the bedroom and up to my mom and said,
Mommy, there's a police officer in your closet.
When recollecting on the story, my mom told me that she instantly gotten chills and was taken aback by what I had just said. So yeah, that's it. I personally don't remember much of it besides the vague memory of seeing the shadowy figure in my parents' closet. I've heard that young children are more prone to seeing supernatural entities, so it makes sense that it happened to me at such a young age. So around 6 years ago, I lived near Old Town Jerusalem. Most parts of it that are built right now are a few hundred years old at most, but the foundations date back thousands of years. I used to hang around there quite a bit during the evening and night, as it is very beautiful and quiet when all the tourists leave. Plus, a good friend of mine lived there with her family. Most of the time, there was nothing out of the ordinary, just tiny old alleys and streets. But I did experience some things that made me doubt my skepticism of the supernatural over that year living there. First, one evening as I was going to visit my friend, I suddenly felt very cold. This was around mid-August, which in Israel means over 30 degrees Celsius. It was a pretty sudden shift. I had this strong feeling of being watched, and the streetlight near me was flickering. I kept walking towards her house, and a minute or so later, I heard footsteps behind me. This freaked me out, as the street seemed pretty empty, and the footsteps sounded close, and came out of nowhere. I had to turn right a few steps later, and as I turned, I looked around and saw no one there. That creepy being watched feeling kept on until I got to my friend's house. I did tell her what happened, and she said that I'm not the first to experience such things on that street. The second thing that comes to mind is that I was walking around the Russian area when I heard a strong bang come from what looked like some public building. When I looked towards it, I saw the front door wide open, which was odd, as no one was around. I looked for a little longer and saw what seemed to be a figure of a man looking at me from the front window. It was dark, and I couldn't make out much more of it. A second later, it seemed to disappear, and the front door slammed shut in front of my face. I noped the fuck out of there. I later found out that it was a Russian hospital. You all can look that one up. Apparently, it's counted as one of the most haunted buildings in Jerusalem. So much so, some guards refused to patrol that area in previous decades. The last one happened when my friend was with me. I joined her for an evening prayer at the synagogue. Not religious or Jewish for that matter, but I do enjoy the tradition occasionally, and we left early since she was feeling bad. We were both heading to the backyard when we heard the gate open and close. We weren't in line of sight to it yet, but if someone would go out, we would have likely seen them, as there was only one path back. However, as we approached it, we didn't see anyone going in either. That, for itself, was odd, but as we walked towards it, it started slowly opening by what seemed to be itself. We both looked at each other, turned around, and walked towards the front gate, deciding silently that a freaky moving by itself gate isn't something that we felt like dealing with. After a few steps, we started hearing footsteps following us. We sped out of there, practically running, though my friend claims that at some point she felt something grab her arm. Personally, I didn't experience that, but when we got to the front of the synagogue, one of the other ladies was also outside and leaving towards her home. She saw how frightened we were and asked what happened. We told her we heard something chase us, and she claimed that she saw no one behind us. Stayed away from that synagogue ever since, even though it's counterintuitive as places of prayer usually don't have this kind of experience. I had a few other weird vibes and feelings of being watched, etc. when I was living around there, but nothing visual or auditory except these. Still sometimes doubt it, thinking it's just me being a little edgy since it's a really old, kind of quiet place, especially after dark. This story is from a while back, and I got reminded of it today. This happened when I was in the 5th grade. We moved to a new house where the landlords lived downstairs and we lived upstairs. Even before we moved in, this house gave me the chills. I begged my dad not to move here. Obviously, I was ignored. It was my parents, sister, and grandparents living in the house. After we moved in, I would get a reoccurring nightmare where I was being chased by something in the veranda downstairs. I fall and get dragged by someone while screaming for help. I would always wake up terrified. I shared a room with my grandma, and my parents and sister shared another. My grandpa slept in the living room. I had pictures of several deities stuck on the walls of my room because of how terrified I was in the house. That is the only place I felt like someone was not stalking or staring at me. The kitchen plus storage room especially creeped me out because every time I was in there, I felt like I was being watched constantly. I would leave as soon as I can. My grandma used to feel really scared as well. She would always wake me up to use the restroom outside our room. One night, as I stood outside the restroom, I turned around, and at the entryway to the kitchen, I saw a misty figure standing there, watching me. I almost shit my pants, but I didn't scream. I grabbed my grandma as soon as she came out and ran to our room. This kept happening until we moved out. I never told anybody. 2 years after we moved into another house, my grandparents and I were talking. This house came up and they told me that it was haunted. I was surprised because I thought I had made it up in my head and was probably overthinking. Then my grandparents told me several stories of their experiences in the house. One of the things the entity used to do was go outside to the veranda outside the house and scream for help to my grandma in my voice in the middle of the night. My grandpa would look outside the window, see me, think it was me, and run to help outside, only to find no one there. He would run to my room and see me sleeping fine. Sometimes he felt like it was sitting on his neck and choking him. One day, his friend, who is very spiritual, came home to visit him randomly. A few minutes after he came, he suddenly ran towards the kitchen, looking at the entryway and the storage room area, and screamed.
Who are you? Why are you torturing this family? Leave, leave, leave.
My grandparents were so confused since they never told him about anything. A few minutes later, he drank 2 gallons of water and then said,
You really should leave this house. There is a very evil entity following you guys, and it's the reason for all your misfortunes in this house.
Turns out the landlord's father unalived himself in that house a year before we moved in. We found this after we moved out. It turns out when I felt like I was being followed or watched all the time in the house, it was true. It genuinely scared the crap out of me after I listened to my grandparents. I have told this story to several friends, family, and coworkers, partly to tell a weird experience I had in the forest, and partly to see if I could get some insight onto what I experienced. I am also interested in hearing from people reading this, what they think might have happened. I have photos of the area that I am hoping to attach to this post. I am originally from northwestern Ontario, and I have been in and out of forests my whole life. I grew up hunting, fishing, camping, and have gone on many remote backcountry canoe trips. I have also worked in the forest for a few different jobs. I have always felt very comfortable in the forest and have never had a bad experience. That was until working in the forest near New Liskeard, Ontario. I was working as an ecologist in the district of North Bay, Ontario. As an ecologist, I had many different jobs that brought me to every end of the district. One of those jobs involves conducting inventory on old logging cut blocks. This is something that I have done multiple times over multiple summers in different areas of the province. This particular block was located west of New Liskeard, about 45-minute drive out of town. The area was very rural, with farm fields and the odd farmhouse scattered throughout. While driving the roads, it was common for other vehicles to stop and stare at you. This might be because we were driving in a marked truck, or that we were the only people the locals didn't recognize. The block we looked for hadn't been cut since 1995 and was located down this old, rarely used logging road. The two of us were tasked with collecting data on the block. To get to the block, we had to turn off this overgrown road that barely fit a truck. The road had many mud pits that nearly sunk our truck at multiple locations. When we couldn't drive any further, we had to walk the rest of the way to the block, which took about a half hour. The work started the same as any other day. While we worked, we talked about office drama, funny experiences we'd have, and what good movies we'd watched recently. As we got further into the block, I started to feel my chest get tighter. As we continued, I started feeling like we were being watched through the trees. These feelings got stronger the further we traveled into the logging block. I tried to shrug them off until my coworker suddenly stopped reciting the data we were collecting, looked at me, and said,
I have a terrible feeling about this place.
We then discovered that we'd both been feeling like we were being watched and that something wasn't right about this area of the forest. We continued our work with the unsettling feeling persisting. As we continued further into the cut block, keeping our conversation, we suddenly stopped dead in our tracks, dropping the last word that was uttered. We both heard what sounded like two people having a conversation. This we couldn't comprehend because we were in a remote area, deep down this almost undrivable trail, on which we saw no sign of people. Then, another hour walk into the bush to get to our location in the cut block. The forest was too thick to be of any use recreationally, and it was not hunting season. What was also troubling was that we couldn't make out what was being said. The voices would continue for a few seconds, then disappear as quickly as they started. Once they stopped, we would continue our work, but be stopped in our tracks as the incomprehensible voices would pick up a few minutes later. This pattern continued until we came across trees that had been bent over and snapped. Now, it's not uncommon to find trees bent and snapped from bears, moose, and even the weather. But what was odd about these trees was their proximity to other trees. We would find a tight cluster of trees with the middle tree snapped and the others untouched. The trees were also free of any rub marks or scarring. Then we came across a patch of younger poplar trees that were completely surrounded by an almost perfect circle of dense spruce and pine trees. Within the patch, almost all of the poplar trees had been snapped and bent down in different directions, but the surrounding evergreens were untouched. Neither of us had ever seen anything like this before, and with the feeling that someone was watching us, we quickly got out of the area. As we moved back out of the block, the voices stopped, and the feelings of dread and being watched drifted away. We both expressed that it felt normal again, and that we were only a half-hour walk away from where we had the experience. I have shown different foresters the photos looking for an explanation, but never received a clear answer. The best I received was, maybe the soil composition is different in that location, but all expressed how they'd never seen trees broken like that. I've asked First Nation individuals from different communities and have been told by multiple people that what I experienced was a bad omen that shouldn't be talked about. Now that I type that out, I'm starting to have second thoughts about whether or not this is a good idea. My partner and I are avid hikers. Last July, we went on a trip and decided to camp at this spot that we love just west of Shenandoah. It's quiet, off the beaten path, and offers absolutely spectacular views of both Shenandoah and portions of George Washington National Forest to the west. The first day and evening of trip itself were nice and uneventful, though we didn't sleep super well because of the humidity. The next morning, we decided to go for a hike in a portion of Jefferson Forest we'd never been to before. It's comprised of ATV trails and about a dozen campsites, but has a trail that leads to an old fire tower we've always wanted to check out. It was about a 45-minute drive from our campsite, mostly on back roads. When we got there, the first thing that stuck out to us was how empty the campsites were. We actually didn't camp there the night before because we've heard that the site is usually packed, and we knew that we wouldn't arrive early enough on the weekend to get a spot. There were only 2 spots taken. In one was a desiccated tent and a bunch of garbage. It looked like someone had been there for a while, but it was deserted when we arrived. In the other, there was a young woman, I'm guessing in her late teens, setting up a small backpacking tent. There was a truck and one other smaller car in the parking area. We parked and started getting our gear together, and the woman approached us to ask if we knew where the trailhead was. I told her that we'd read that it branched off about 100 yards into one of the ATV tracks, but we weren't 100% sure which. Since I was getting such weird vibes from the place, I kind of hoped that she'd stick around and go with us to find it, but she just thanked us and took off in the general direction of the trail. We set off and walked up and down a few of the ATV trails until we found the walking path. We saw 2 ATVs shoot by us at one point, but otherwise didn't encounter anyone else, including the woman from earlier. It took us about an hour to get to the top of the mountain, where the fire tower was. It was an old metal structure, and you have to climb the narrow set of stairs to get to the top of it. We got up, looked around, took some pictures, and started heading down. Honestly, the view was kind of a letdown. About halfway down, very suddenly, everything stopped. The birds, the bugs. It was dead silent. And I don't know quite how to put this into words, but it felt like the ancientness of the forest was contorting and crushing us. I felt trapped and cornered in spite of the expanse around us. My partner and I looked at each other and wordlessly started to book it out of there. We started running back to the car, but the feeling only followed us. As we were rounding one of the switchbacks, we heard this unearthly shriek, like a cross between metal on metal and a choir screaming off key. And we saw something. I just got a glimpse of it before we blacked out. I don't know how to describe it, other than it looked huge, despite clearly not taking up much physical space, and moved in flashes. It didn't have a color, it just felt like evil and emptiness. I probably only perceived it for half a second before my memory just completely gave way. When we came to, we were sitting in the car and 2 hours had passed, double the length of time it took us to get up there. I don't know if we lost consciousness or just somehow blocked those hours out. I learned later the exact same thing happened to my partner. Both of the cars were next to us in the parking lot, and there were still just the 2 tents at the campsite. The woman wasn't in hers, and it looked exactly the same as she'd left it. I think about her all the time, and I've spent a ton of time trying to figure out if someone went missing around the time of our trip. It took a few months for my partner and I to talk about that day. Some of the stories I've seen posted on this sub have made me feel so much less alone. We still love to hike, but honestly haven't been up to the Appalachian forests since this happened. I'm curious if others have had other experiences like this. My experience happened back in August of 2014, but it is still vivid in my mind. I was unaware of the missing 411 phenomenon until I stumbled upon this sub recently. I was on a youth group camping trip in New Hampshire. We were coming to a close after 2 days of uneventful camping, and I was tasked with going to tear down the archery range, a temporary makeshift affair we had set up for the youth to practice shooting with bows and arrows. The archery range was down the hill from the campsite, and then down a slight slope to the left, off the trail road to a small oval clearing, abutting the woods and tree line. I walked down to the range by myself and started gathering up the equipment. I had finished making the pile for my first return trip when a very eerie feeling came over me. The sound from the camp up the hill had faded away, and it was perfectly quiet and still, not a whisper of a breeze. There was a humming and a vibration in the air that I sensed in me, if that makes sense. For some inexplicable reason, I snapped my head to the right to view the tree line and noticed that there was an area with thinner brush, like an opening, and I started walking towards it like I was being drawn. As I cleared the tree line and stepped into the woods proper, I could feel the pull to go deeper into the woods become much stronger. Looking ahead, the woods were in deep shadow, with a strange group of 4 trees about 75 feet away, lit by a shaft of light beaming at an angle from above. The light wasn't the normal afternoon yellow sunlight, but a very strange golden color. The light hit the trees in a way that the bases of the trees were glowing in a beckoning way. With the rest of the woods in a shadow and the trees lit up, it created a weird tunnel vision. The compulsion to go investigate the 4 trees was now almost overwhelming. The thought of, "Come see, come quickly, come right now," was insistent. My head was pounding, like a headache without the pain. As I was about to take another step forward, another separate feeling from the depths of my being started screaming at me to stop immediately. I instantly viscerally knew that, despite how enticing this call was, if I proceeded forward towards those trees, I would be lost to the world. That specific impression, lost to the world, scared me deeply. The feeling of "this is not right" and "danger" were palpable to me. This somehow overrode the compulsion. I quickly looked backwards to the opening, and I could see the boughs sitting on the ground, and I think seeing a bit of reality helped me break the hold of the call. I suddenly felt a hollow pit in my stomach, and I started tracing a path slowly backwards towards the opening. I kept my eyes on those trees, like I was facing down a predator. I didn't want to turn my back on them. I couldn't turn my back on them. Making it back and stepping through the opening to the archery range, my head almost instantly cleared. I could again hear noises from the camp and feel the wind. I looked at where I had just stepped from, and it now felt normal. I immediately grabbed the first load of equipment and headed back to camp. For some reason, I didn't tell anyone at camp what I experienced. On my subsequent trip to get the last load of equipment, absolutely everything was normal, but I stayed the hell away from that opening. What stands out to me is the lost to the world impression. It was so clear and ominous and final. I can't express how truly drawn I was to go deeper into those woods. The feeling to give myself over to it, whatever it was. I do know that something not good would have happened if I hadn't heeded that warning. I know that my experience was very real and very scary. I am also convinced that I wouldn't have come out if I had kept going that day.